God, King, and Algorithm. The story of how Nature Boy built a cult on YouTube. Imagine you're 22 years old. You're working a dead-end job. Your paycheck barely covers the bills. Every morning you wake up with that heavy feeling in your chest. The feeling that you're living a life that isn't really yours. You're struggling with depression, with loneliness, with the sense that the world was built for other people, not for you. And then, one day, while scrolling through YouTube because you can't sleep, you find a man who seems to have figured everything out. He's in the jungle, hair loose, wide smile, the look of someone who owes nothing to anyone. He's surrounded by young, vibrant people who laugh, make music, grow their own food. He talks about freedom, about breaking with the system, about building something real, far from racism, from capitalism, from the emptiness of modern life. He calls it a black utopia. And as you watch, for the first time in a long time, you feel something you'd almost forgotten. Hope. So you start following. You subscribe to the channel. You share the videos with friends. You start messaging other followers who feel exactly what you feel. And then, a few months later, you make the decision that changes everything. You decide to join him. What you don't know yet, what nobody tells you, is that the paradise he's selling is, in fact, a prison. And that the door, from the outside, has no handle. Part 1. The origin. To understand how someone builds a cult on YouTube, you first have to understand the man behind it. Eligio Bishop was born in Harlem, New York, in 1982. His childhood was unstable from the start. He spent years being passed from home to home through the American foster care system, a system that, for many children, means growing up without roots, without belonging, without the feeling that there is anywhere in the world that is truly yours. He was adopted at 11, but the years before had already left their mark. The details of that period of Bishop's life are scarce. He rarely spoke about them in public, and when he did, it was vaguely, like someone who had learned to turn pain into narrative, into fuel for his own image. What we know is that Eligio grew up feeling like an outsider, someone the world had forgotten, who needed to create his own world in order to exist with any sense of dignity. In adulthood, he drifted, jobs here and there, ideas that started with enthusiasm and went nowhere. He was clearly intelligent. He had a way of speaking that held attention, a capacity to articulate complex thoughts in simple and compelling ways. He was charismatic in the most literal sense of the word. People listened to him. But for a long time, there was no clear direction for all that energy. Then, in late 2015, he found his instrument, a YouTube channel. He called it NatureboyTV. At first, the content was passionate but relatively harmless. Bishop talked about racial injustice, environmental consciousness, the need for Black Americans to reclaim their autonomy in a country that, according to him, was built on their exploitation. He preached a return to nature, a disconnection from the system, a reconnection with something truer and older. And people listened. Because here's the thing. In 2015 and 2016, those messages hit deep. Police brutality dominated the headlines. The Black Lives Matter movement was in the streets. Millions of young Black Americans were exhausted, angry, and looking for alternatives. And Bishop had a ready-made answer, wrapped in beautiful imagery and a voice that carried absolute certainty. Leave Babylon behind. Come build something new. The channel grew. The followers grew. And with them, Bishop's conviction that he had something special, that he had been chosen to lead. Comments poured in. Strangers from across the country told him he had changed their lives, that his words had given them a direction they had never found anywhere else. For a man who had spent decades feeling invisible, that kind of attention was intoxicating, and it would prove to be the seed of everything that followed. Part 2. The Promise of Paradise. In July 2016, Bishop gathered a small group of followers and took them to Honduras. It was the official beginning of what he called Carbon Nation, a community built around natural living, collective creativity, and spiritual growth. A real alternative to the society he said was on the verge of collapse. The pitch was seductive in every detail. Members would adopt a vegan diet, live off the land, make music and art together. They would document everything on social media, and that was a central point. not a minor detail. Followers were encouraged, in fact, required, to maintain an active online presence. They posted videos of daily life, songs they recorded together, reflections on living outside the system. Those videos brought in new recruits. And, most importantly for Bishop, they brought in donations. Carbon Nation was partly funded by online engagement. Every view, every share, every dollar sent by a fan who dreamed of one day joining the group was fuel to keep the operation running, and to keep Bishop at the top of it. And it worked better than anyone on the outside could have imagined. The group's online presence grew rapidly. Bishop understood the algorithms in an almost intuitive way. The director of the documentary about the cult later described how Bishop had a sharp instinct for working the platforms, and how, over time, he kept doing more and more extreme things to keep feeding the algorithm. More drama, more provocation, more spectacle, because the algorithm rewards whatever holds attention. And Bishop learned that fast. But while the videos showed smiles, music, and jungle sunsets, there was something the cameras weren't filming. Something that was beginning quietly behind the scenes. From 2016 to 2022, Carbon Nation moved constantly. Honduras, Costa Rica, Mexico, and eventually back to the United States. With each new location, Bishop framed the move as an evolution, as if the group were always advancing towards something better, something pure. But what was really happening with each move was simpler and darker. The isolation deepened. Contact with the outside world diminished. And Bishop's control over every aspect of members' lives became more absolute. At some point during those years of wandering, he gave himself new names. First, Three God, then simply the King. He declared himself a supreme master, a divine being sent to guide the chosen. And he began building a code of rules that, on the surface, sounded like spiritual discipline, but that in practice was a carefully designed system to keep people in and to make the idea of leaving increasingly unthinkable. Part 3. Inside the Cult. It's hard to put into words what life inside Carbon Nation was actually like. But the former members who had the courage to speak, first to investigators, then to the courts, then to documentary cameras, painted a picture that leaves no doubt about what that place was. When you entered the group, you gave up everything. Literally, your name was changed. Bishop chose new names for members, erasing the previous identity like crossing out a rough draft. Your belongings were surrendered to the group. Your money went into a collective fund that Bishop controlled entirely. Your phone, your social media, your contact with family and friends on the outside, all of it was mediated and monitored by him. A former member said, during the sentencing hearing, that Bishop told her her soul belonged to him, that there was absolutely no possibility of saying no. The rules inside Carbon Nation were designed not just to control behavior, but to dismantle the capacity for independent thought. At certain periods, women were not allowed to wear shirts. Members could only eat when Bishop was hungry, which meant that everyone's biological rhythms were subordinated to his moods and desires. Men and women were sometimes forbidden from speaking to each other, and any sign of disrespect, even a facial expression that seemed wrong to Bishop, could result in public punishment. Standing in a corner for hours, doing squats in front of the entire group, being completely ignored by everyone who had learned that loyalty to Bishop was worth more than any friendship or human solidarity. These mechanisms have names. Experts in cult dynamics know them well. Sleep deprivation, food deprivation, social isolation, unpredictable reward and punishment, identity replacement. These are techniques that, applied consistently, can break anyone's will regardless of how strong they are. Not because the person is weak, but because human beings were not built to withstand the kind of sustained pressure without rest, without allies, without any external frame of reference. And there was something even darker. Testimony at trial revealed that Bishop had turned the group into a structure of systematic sexual exploitation. One witness said that every woman in Carbon Nation was required to have sex with Bishop, or to participate in some kind of sexual act with him. And that many times when that happened, it was forced. There was no consent. There was only the understanding, installed over months of conditioning, that nobody said no to the king. That same witness was 22 years old when she first encountered Bishop online. She was struggling with depression. She had seen the videos, the posts, the music. She had seen young people like her living something that looked full of purpose and beauty. She had believed the promise, and she only realized much later that what looked like an open door to a better life was, in fact, the entrance to a trap. This is how cults work in the social media age. They don't need active recruiters, airport approaches, or flyers on the street. They create content. They show up in your feed. They find you in your most vulnerable moment, scrolling through YouTube at 2 in the morning, exhausted and alone, and they show you exactly what you need to see in that moment. Prosecutors would later say, during the trial, that Bishop had his pick of the women in the group, that it was an implicit understanding never needed to be said out loud. Nobody said no to the king, because anyone who did knew what happened to those who try to leave. Part 4. The escape that changed everything. In 2022, carbonation was settled in a house in Decatur, Georgia, in DeKalb County, on the outskirts of Atlanta. It was one more stop in a long sequence of addresses, one more fresh start that Bishop presented as a step toward paradise. But for one of the women in the group, that would be the last address. She is identified in court records only by her initials, AV. What we know about her is this. She had spent years inside carbonation. She had seen what the group was, what Bishop was, and she had reached the point where she simply could not continue. She had made the decision that many women in that situation take years to arrive at, and that some never managed to make it all. She was leaving. She packed her bags. She called a rideshare driver, and while she waited outside, Bishop appeared. According to the testimony she would later give to police, he approached her and said she belonged to him, that she did not have permission to leave. The other women in the group were shouting around her. There was pressure from every direction, and when she held firm, when she tried to maintain the decision she had made, he raped her. After she managed to get out, Bishop posted explicit videos of her on social media without her consent. It was the last form of control he had left. Revenge porn as punishment, as a warning, as a message to all the other women in the group about what happens to those who try to leave. AV went to the police the same day. On March 30th, 2022, she walked into a precinct in DeKalb County and told them everything. She sat across from investigators and described, in detail, years of abuse that she had never been able to speak about openly before. The investigation that followed lasted 3 weeks. Investigators gathered testimony, videos, and digital evidence. In April 2022, Eligio Bishop was arrested. For many of those who had followed carbonation from the outside, journalists, activists, former followers who had already sensed something was wrong, Bishop's arrest was a relief, but also a brutal reminder of how much time had passed, of how many people had cycled through that group, of how many stories would never be told publicly. Part 5. The Trial and the Verdict. Eligio Bishop's trial began in February 2024, nearly 2 years after his arrest. And for those who followed it, it was a deeply disturbing experience, not just because of what was revealed, but because of how it was revealed. Prosecutors made a strategic decision that proved powerful, to use against Bishop the very videos he had created. Videos that had originally been posted on YouTube and Instagram as recruitment content, as propaganda for the perfect life inside carbonation, now displayed in a courtroom as criminal evidence. The same images that had drawn hundreds of people into the group were now helping to build the case that would put him behind bars for the rest of his life. Witness after witness took the stand. Some wept. Others spoke with a cold, contained anger that revealed years of forced silence. Each testimony described the same arc, the same stages. The initial seduction, the sense of belonging, the gradual shift in tone, the tightening grip of the rules, the slow erosion of the ability to imagine a life outside that world. And then the abuse, physical, psychological, sexual. The jury heard it all, and on March 1st, 2024, declared Eligio Bishop guilty on all counts. Rape, false imprisonment, 3 counts related to the transmission of sexually explicit material without the victim's consent. At the sentencing hearing, the judge said something that captures, in a way, everything that had been presented over those weeks. He stated that he would have considered exercising some discretion in setting the sentence if Bishop had shown any sign of remorse, guilt, or regret at any point during the proceedings. Instead, what the judge said he observed was Bishop laughing, making comments, appearing genuinely surprised and even offended by the testimony of his own victims, as if the whole thing were a misunderstanding, as if he still did not understand, or did not want to understand, the magnitude of what he had done. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years on top of that. Eligio Bishop, Nature Boy, 3 God, the king of carbonation, was 41 years old. Part 6, Why This Matters. It's tempting to treat Bishop's story as an isolated case, a disturbed man who found a gap and exploited it. A rare, exceptional phenomenon, far removed from most people's reality. But that reading ignores something that investigators, cult experts, and former group members themselves repeated throughout the entire process. Carbonation would not have been possible without YouTube, without Instagram, without the algorithms that rewarded Bishop every time he posted something more provocative, more dramatic, more capable of stopping someone's scroll. Bishop didn't need an isolated compound in the middle of the desert. He didn't need a network of contacts, years of building credibility in a physical community. He created a channel. He learned to speak to a camera. He understood what people wanted to hear at a particular historical moment, and he delivered it, wrapped in beautiful imagery and a narrative of resistance and belonging. The algorithm did the rest. And that is the most uncomfortable point in this entire story. Because the question it raises isn't just, how did one man do this? The question is, what is it about the platforms we use every single day that made this path possible? The people who joined Carbonation were not naive. They were not uneducated. They were real people with real histories who came to YouTube in a moment of vulnerability, dealing with depression, isolation, a genuine desire for something more meaningful than what daily life seemed to offer, and found, in a thumbnail, what looked like an answer. One of the investigators on the case said it plainly. Bishop's ultimate goal was never grounded in any tangible reality. The paradise he promised did not exist, but the platform gave him the reach to make it seem like it did. And every time he pushed further, every more disturbing scene, every more absurd rule, every more grandiose declaration of divinity, the algorithm rewarded him with more views, more followers, more donations, more power. This is the cult of the digital age. It has no robe, no initiation ritual, no compound surrounded by barbed wire. It has thumbnails and new video notifications. It doesn't need geographical isolation to function. It starts on anyone's phone, in any room, at any hour of the night. And that is why the story of Carbonation is also a story about us. About how we consume content. About how the algorithm makes no distinction between what is true and what merely appears convincing. About how loneliness, at sufficient scale, becomes a market, and about who profits when it is exploited. Closing. Eligio Bishop is serving his sentence at Macon State Prison in Georgia. In August 2024, he was hospitalized after being injured in a fight inside the prison. According to records, he was released after treatment and returned to the correctional system. He is 43 years old and will never walk out of those gates as a free man again. His victims are rebuilding their lives. For many of them, leaving Carbonation was only the first step of a long and painful journey. A process of relearning things that seemed simple before they entered, like trusting their own judgment, making decisions without asking for permission, reconnecting with people who existed on the outside of that world and who, for years, had been described as part of the Babylon that needed to be left behind. Some of those relationships never recovered. Some of those people will spend years still trying to understand how they got to where they got and convincing themselves that it wasn't weakness, but that they were deliberately manipulated by someone who had made manipulation his craft. The Hulu documentary series, The Cult of Nature Boy, produced by ABC News Studios, is available now for streaming. It is serious work based on real footage from inside Carbonation and on interviews with former members who decided to speak. If the story moved you, I genuinely encourage you to watch it and to hear those voices directly, unfiltered. And the next time you're scrolling through YouTube late at night, and someone appears in your feed who seems to have all the answers, who speaks with that absolute certainty about how the world works, about what you're doing wrong, about the special place where everything would be different, maybe it's worth pausing for just a second and asking yourself one simple question. Who benefits if you believe him?